Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm just going to quickly introduce our speakers. So, oh, you're fine. So Ben from American Chemical Society and Lindsay from Research Square, just making sure I got the appropriate affiliation, are going to talk to us about conference attendance and how to get the most out of your conference experience in terms of professional education and networking, all kinds of stuff. So there are several people online today, so, hit your mark. The camera's there. And then at the end, for questions and answers, if you have a question, Jody or I will bring you a microphone. Just be sure to wait until you get the microphone to ask so the people online can hear and then hear Ben and Lindsay's response. So thanks for coming, and I'm going to hand it over to...
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So first of all, I actually want to follow up by saying we would love to invite conversation because it's a smaller group, so I think that might be nice. And Ben and I by no means claim to be experts on this. We're just drawing from our experiences. So it'd be cool to hear the experiences that you guys have had as well. So just to introduce myself, I am the Strategic Partnerships Manager here at American Journal Experts, AJE, which Research Square is the parent company for. And to give you guys just a couple of conference networking events that I have been to, SSP is one that I've been pretty involved with. The annual meeting, we have some local meetings as well that I co-chair for that. Ben, I think, is going to go into a little detail about kind of what is involved in those. I come to these ISMTE local meetings. I went to an internet summit, which is a marketing conference this past year. So I'm going to kind of draw on that one a little bit, which will be a little bit different from some of the scholarly publishing ones. And then I also, we were asked to speak in an event called Future Pub in Raleigh at the new fancy library at NC State, which was really cool. And that was kind of the future of publication. Different sort of innovations in that space. So yeah, that was just a cool networking event as well.
All right, as you guys have already heard, my name is Ben. I work at the American Chemical Society as a product manager covering author and reviewer services. This is a recent development for me. I was here at Research Square for a number of years before that. But my background is actually in science, so going to conferences has been something I've been doing since 2005 when I was going to microbiology conferences. And then as I transitioned out of the lab into the publishing industry, I've been fortunate enough to travel some as well. SSP, Society for Scholarly Publishing, is the organization where I've had most involvement. I've been to 5 of their annual meetings now. I've been co-chairing the planning committee for a few years. They also, as Lindsay mentioned, do hold local events, which tend to be sort of network-focused, panel discussion kind of things. I've been to ISMTE. I went to something called Science Online. That was probably, I think, 6 years ago, and it was here in Raleigh, and it was just as designated or designed to promote communication about science communication. So the sort of people from all over the spectrum. So yeah, that's sort of an example. Maybe networking events, kind of like Lindsay said. That's kind of what my background is. So we don't have slides. This is our slide. And what I do have on the right side there is the kind of things that we're hoping to touch on throughout. But as Lindsay mentioned, if we derail and go a different direction or there's something that is more interesting to you guys, that's great. So we're planning to discuss a little bit about kind of temporally. So planning ahead before you go to the conference, what are some things to think about? What are some things to do when you're there? How to balance, your desires to do networking, to balance a little bit of work. You probably can't get rid of all of it. And then thinking through just if you're anything like me, you, at least over time, it got better, but not always the easiest thing to do is like break into conversations and kind of get yourself out there. So we'll try to touch on that. And then what to do when we want to follow up afterward. So real quick before we start, I'm going to give a quick shout out to the AJE Author Resource Center, which has an article about primarily focused on research conferences, but a lot of these same tips and ideas can be found there. So that could be something that if you want to check it out, I recommend.
Which, by the way, Ben used to work on, just to call out the Author Resource Center. Okay, so planning ahead, things that are related to work. Would highly recommend catching up on work or getting ahead wherever you can. I know that's not always feasible, especially if you're in like an operations-based type of role, but I know myself, I'm looking at a long to-do list of things that maybe I've had sitting there for a week that maybe I could go ahead and catch up on before I head out for something. Definitely make alternate plans for any meetings you'll miss. I think sometimes like established weekly meetings can perhaps get overlooked. And so it's a nice thing for you to be able to let the people know that are in those that you won't be there. Confirm the plan for when you're traveling. We are like Google Doc obsessed here, where basically you share with people that are, Kurt, do you want to grab the door? Thanks. Where obviously you want to let like your boss know and people that you work with on a regular basis, but then if something comes up while you're out and people need to know where you are, then you have that set up. Also, obviously set up an email autoresponder and mention in that where you are. You'd be surprised at how many people, I think you've had this happen, I've had this happen, where you're at some conference and you have no idea that a person that you work with is actually there as well, and they see that autoresponder and say, hey, maybe we can catch up for a coffee. So that's really helpful. As far as planning ahead for things around the conference, go ahead and reach out to people who you know will be there. Trying to plan specific times to meet with people before their calendar gets filled up. I find that really helpful. And then two, this year specifically at the SSP annual meeting, I had somebody reach out to me in advance and said, hey, yeah, it'd be great if we catch up. And we kind of left it at, we had a booth there this year and we said, yeah, just stop by the booth at any time. They never stop by the booth. So I would highly recommend kind of locking down some times for stuff like that when you can. Review the session list and go ahead and identify ones that you're interested in. And then when you're looking at those ahead of time, you can ask people in your direct network in your office, hey, are there any that are on here that sound interesting to you that maybe I can bring some notes back from as well? Look for additional activities around the conference. I don't know if anybody else has had good experiences with things like fun runs or dining groups, but those can be a good opportunity to network and get to know some new people. Download the app if they have one. I've never been more grumpy in my life. That Internet Summit conference that I talked about did not have an app, and I felt so lost because I like to have my schedule on the app and I like to see where everything is. It just makes it really handy. I also, for sessions, I like to go ahead and mark those on my calendar as well, just so you're making sure everything kind of lines up with the meetings that you've established. Oh, on the app as well, you can usually track attendees. I've been known to stalk a list or two just to see who's going to be at things, so that can be helpful. And then if there's not an app, I would highly recommend printing out your schedule. Just because I think when you get like the booklet or the brochure or whatever, when you get there, it can be super overwhelming to see, oh yeah, what was the session that I said I was going to attend at this time? Show your manager a list of attendees and see if there's anybody that they might find interesting for you to connect with, because you might have missed somebody that they know and would be really cool for you to connect with while you're there. So wanted to open it up for discussion, if you guys will humor me. Do you guys have other tips or advice for pre-planning for events that you have been to?
Just while we're seeing if anything's online, one thing to keep in mind, and she brought up the fun run, I think this is a good time, is check the weather before you go and think about like what kind of clothes you'll need to bring. And this is something that I used to leave till the very last minute, and I would just be like, no, I'll survive. And then I end up someplace in shorts and it's 40 degrees. And I'm like, well, okay, I didn't think that through. So thinking about what activities are gonna be, if you're gonna be able to spend an extra day there, you know, then bring your nice, easy walking shoes and you can walk around the city. If you're, you know, just gonna focus on the conference, you can bring your slightly nicer gear, but thinking about bringing some stuff that you might want to go for a run in the morning, or you might want to go for a workout at the hotel gym or something like that. So just kind of keeping that mental list.
I would just add to your list of planning, like if you're on a committee, like making sure you put that on your calendar as well. And usually those are like really early in the morning or after all the sessions are done. So for me, that involves me planning where my food is going to come from, because I get really grumpy if I'm like in back-to-back meetings all day and I can't find the food I want. So I usually pack a lot of snacks to take with me to conferences. So that's something that I've learned over the years.
No, I think the snack thing is really good, because oftentimes you may end up finding yourself at a hotel where to go down to their little Starbucks or whatever, it's $9 to get a couple cookies, and you're like, man, I could have just brought something and stuffed it in my bag. Yeah.
So I went to CSE earlier this year, and there was a woman, it was like for the keynote, and I sat down next to her and she had like a soda or something, and I said, where did you get that? And she said, oh, well, when I got in last night, I found the nearest grocery store and I like stocked up on all the stuff that I knew they wouldn't have. So that's another, if you don't want to bring it in your suitcase.
Awesome.
I would say to treat going to the conference like it is part of your job. Don't try to do all of your work at the conference during the breaks, or, forgo going out to dinner with somebody, because I find that the networking stuff is just as important as being able to pay attention during the sessions.
Yeah.
So get coverage, let people know that you're going to be out, plan for the worst case scenario that you won't be able to get to everything.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And that is sort of a segue to the next part. Are there any other questions or? Oh, we've got one.
I would second what Michelle said. That's a very easy way to ruin a conference if you try to do that, and I have done that. And also, if you're a coffee drinker, think about taking a travel mug instead of relying on those tiny little hotel coffee cups and having to refill them over and over again, and it'll keep your coffee warm. And I didn't think it was such an innovative thing when I did that, but people were like, what? I should have done that. It's like, I just guzzle down like a bunch of coffee every morning. So I do that.
All right. Yeah. So pack your good clothes, pack your favorite travel mug. Sounds like good advice to me. I don't drink coffee, so it slipped my mind. But I have on the other hand, though, brought a little refillable water bottle. And I think that's maybe a good thing to add. It can be real hard to find the water fountain or whatever. Yeah. All right. Well, with that, we're going to move on into what happens when you're actually there. So I was going to talk a little bit about really focus in on actually like going to the sessions and how that can sort of build your network even beyond what you're going to learn. But we'll also touch on some of the things that you discussed in a little bit about balancing work once you're there. So I think people think of the sessions kind of as the focal point of a conference, and even if there are times where you may not attend as many because you have other things going on, that's just where we're gonna start. So some advice for when you're in there is to realize that even though some of it, at least when I first went to my first SSP conference, I would go into a particular session, and I sat down, I would like get my little notepad out, and it's like, oh, I'm ready for this like class, right? That was kind of the way my prior experience had just trained me to do. But you'll find that they're a lot more relaxed than that. And so it's kind of important to think of it as a place where you're going to hear some ideas, you get to mull them, you get to discuss them with people. But it's also a great place to interact. So as soon as you sit down, introduce yourself to the people that are on either side of you. This is something that, it feels weird. You wouldn't do it necessarily at a train station or at the gate at the airport, but it's totally normal at a conference, and especially within the publishing industry, for this to happen. People just to be like, hey, I see you work at whatever, tell me about that. And so people are used to this. They're not going to look at you funny. And you may meet someone interesting. I do recommend that you do take some notes. I mean, this is not, listen to me like I'm your teacher or something, but like I find that I don't even often review the notes super carefully, but if I write down some of the key pieces of information or things that I know I'm going to want to look up, or someone will talk about something and I'll say, I wasn't familiar with that organization at all. By actually writing it down, it just helps it stick in my brain a little bit. And it really is easy to forget those little pieces, even if they seem like they're quick. So if you have a conversation with someone, that can work as well. I met someone, they work at this organization, I'd never heard of it, write down their name real quick, write a little bit about what the organization did. It'll also help you if you're thinking later about how what you learned and who you met might be relevant to your colleagues or to other people at your organization. So that's not usually the lens I have when I'm sitting there at the moment. I'm thinking kind of about me, but if I go back over my notes later, that kind of information stands out. If you have a question, definitely ask it. I think this is something I had to get over, was sort of feeling like, well, they aren't going to know who I am. I don't know if I should be talking like some of the people in here are, VP of whatever at these giant organizations. And, but I can tell you from my perspective, at least, trying to plan the SSP meeting, we are desperate for people to make their panels more interactive and to get more viewpoints in them. It's improving, but there's always room. And so I really think everyone in that room is going to be grateful if you ask a question or you sort of stimulate a new line of discussion. I don't think no one's gonna think it's silly. So if you don't get a chance to ask your question, that happens sometimes. People pack their panel so full with people that the last speaker gets 2 minutes and they don't take any questions at all. Go up afterward and ask. Again, this is totally normal and welcome. If you are the social media type, Twitter is one of the few places that I actually am active. If there's a hashtag, go ahead. I mean, live tweet or talk about something or say, hey, I just found out about this cool new organization, whatever. And you may find that I've found that people end up following me, or I have conversations on there afterward. And I can't say it's led to anything that's maybe changed the course of the world, but I feel like I've made some new friends or acquaintances that way. And it is also very normal. You'll see people have their phones out and be doing this kind of thing. And I find it kind of fun. It helps for me serve as sort of as a piece of note taking as well. I want to again throw it back out to you guys. Does anybody have an interesting story from someone you've been sitting next to at a conference session, or someone that you've met, or something that you learned?
I don't have a specific story, but what I will say is when you were talking about you never know who you'll meet when you sit down and learn about the things that they're doing, I think it's also interesting to learn about different companies. I think sometimes I can get really focused on the person that I'm talking to and what do you do specifically. And then it's nice to kind of like jot down what it is that they are working on, but also go back and do some research later on this is what this company does and seeing kind of where they fit into the bigger landscape too. So I find that helpful.
I'll second what Lindsay said. You know all the like papers and flyers that they put in the conference bag or whatever that you tend to just like dump out straight into the trash can. So I don't look at those at the conference, but I pack them and bring them home as kind of like my reading, just because I'm curious about what different companies are doing. So.
Cool. So I'm going to kind of go more into networking in general at conferences. So obviously, I think try to connect with people outside of your direct group. I think that can be really hard because we get into kind of our comfort zone. And I would encourage, if you have a group of people from your organization that are going, I think it's good to have something set up where you make a point to connect and see how things are going for them and kind of compare your notes. But force yourself to get to know some other people. You'll be surprised how much you can get out of it. Carry business cards also seems kind of obvious, but you wouldn't believe how many times I have come across people who are like, oh man, I don't have any more. And so you try to like jot down however you think they might spell their name and see if you can LinkedIn stalk them later, but still please have business cards. One thing I really liked at SSP this year, I noticed a bunch of people, we had like the lanyard with the, it was like a plastic piece where you had like your name tag in there, and a lot of people were carrying their business cards in the actual like the back part of the name tag, which maybe other people find really obvious, but I thought was super smart. And another thing is, if when you meet somebody, you can remember to jot down like a quick note about them on the back of their card. It'll just help you remember kind of the conversation that you have, maybe jog your memory a little bit. And then also I like to call out little anecdotal things. So I met a guy at SSP this year who went to NC State, which I did too. And so we kind of like bonded. And when I sent him my little follow-up email, I said, go Wolfpack at the end. So I like doing little stuff like that too. So it makes people feel like you really remembered talking to them. Introduce yourself. I would say practice a 1-sentence description, something that's like real quick and easy if you're in that scenario. And then ask other people what they do, especially if you find yourself feeling uncomfortable being in those situations. Turn it on the other person. Most of the time people are really comfortable talking about themselves. And so if you feel kind of awkward, you can just go say your name and say, hey, I'm from here. This is a brief description of what I do. Tell me about what you do. So sitting in a room before a session is a great time to do that. Also standing in line for anything like coffee, snacks, whatever. It's another good time to just strike up a conversation. People are standing there doing nothing, just like you, so you may as well just say hi. Booths are fantastic. If you need to practice talking to somebody, people at booths want to talk to you about what they're doing. So go practice with them before you get in these situations. And then other random occurrences, I'm going to call out Ben, because at SSP this year we had, there was a reception, I think it was the 40th anniversary this year. So they had this big fireworks thing and he's standing out there next to a random person and they struck up a conversation, struck, yes, thank you, struck up a conversation, and you don't know where things like that lead. So just be aware at all times that you can meet people at any point. Look for those extracurricular activities like the dinner group. People that are in those are also interested in networking, so you're in a safe space. Take notes at the end of the day describing the people you met, so maybe jot down those quick ones on the back of your business card, and then at the end of the day, go back and like force yourself to kind of take full notes. I think sometimes it can be tempting to say, oh yeah, I'll just kind of like do all this like on the plane on the way home, and by then you've forgotten because your mind is so filled with all of the things that have happened over the course of a couple of days.
One piece, like so the fireworks example, that was actually someone that she and I had been trying to talk to and trying to email for a while and not getting any traction. And so it just happened to like you standing there and you're like, oh wow, they timed this well. These are pretty cool. And it's like, okay, well now I finally met this person. So that was right. Like even more so than just being interesting, it worked out. It worked out well. Yeah, well enough. The other thing I was just going to add real quickly is it really helps to have, at least in many cases, one sentence about you and a one sentence about your organization. This is perhaps more relevant. Some names, if you say, "Oh, I work at Elsevier," like people will know what that is. But in other cases, they may not. Well, they won't know what you do at that point. Yeah, but they don't. You might not have to explain that so much. But at least I found I work at Research Square, which is like this is what we do. So having those two really quick in my back pocket was helpful.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so the next piece is going to be overcoming introversion. Just really quickly, take breaks. Allow yourself some downtime to recover from meeting all of the people. I even do this, and I'm a super extroverted person. Like I love being around people nonstop, and I even like in the afternoon, evening, maybe before you have like your dinner or whatever, go to your hotel room for like 20 minutes and just chill. Highly recommend. Also, everybody in the scholarly publishing industry is like, I would say 95% introverts. So you are in the safest space. And yeah, so this is another one that I would love to turn on you guys. What's something that you have done that's fun outside of a conference itself? So talking about like those dining groups or those fun runs, would be curious to hear y'all's experience there.
Okay, well, I've definitely done the dining groups. I think that can be fun. Even if there's like one person that you sort of kind of know, you can say, hey, are you going to this? Let's go together. And that can be cool. But I've also had experiences where I went to a conference all by myself. Nobody from my organization went. And I usually use that time to like explore the city. And like, I don't come here often, so I'm going to do me stuff. I'm going to sit at the bar. I'm going to order a nice glass of wine. And sometimes you can just meet people that way, and that can be fun too.
No, I think that's really good advice.
So based on what Michelle said, I went to, the Council of Science Editors meeting was in New Orleans, and it was like the night that everybody was going out, and I kind of wanted to do an earlier dinner than they were going. So I just started walking from my hotel, and it was like, I don't know, 6 or 7 blocks later, I was in the French Quarter, and I just like happened into this restaurant, and I had no idea. I didn't do any Googling or make a reservation. And it ended up being like one of the iconic New Orleans restaurants. Sat at the bar, struck up this conversation with this guy that had been in New Orleans like 15 times. He was totally appalled that I had come to New Orleans and not figured out in advance where I was going to go to dinner. But that was like a really great experience. And it also serves that purpose of like, okay, I'm taking a break from networking and everything like that. And it ended up just being a really cool experience. So.
Yeah, I do think that the break can be different depending on sort of your own personality type or how you run things. And for some people, the break is that they go in the middle of the day and they go for a run, and they come back and they change and they come to more sessions. Or sometimes it is literally a nap, and you're like, well, that 3rd session slot, nothing really awesome there. I am just going to go and recharge, and then you can hit the ground running if there's receptions and dinners and whatever else that night. Okay. So we've mentioned it already a little bit, but wanted to focus some more on balancing work. So if you're going to an industry conference, odds are good no one is expecting you to be doing all of your initial work as well. Or that's, as Kurt would say, that's a setup for failure. So really the conference is the work you're doing that time. But it's really, really hard to escape things 100%. It's really hard, at least in my experience, to just be like, I turned off my phone and I am out, like I'm gone. So I think the key thing is to approach it differently though. Like don't approach it like you need to be on call. Like the chances are what you're doing is not affecting someone's life or something. So you've told people where you're going to be, that they're aware there's going to be a delay. So, a couple things. Take specific times that you're going to go back and look at your email, or even I'm one of those that likes the little red circles to disappear on my phone. So I have to train myself to be like, it's okay, that red circle is going to be there, and it means I'm going to check my email, after dinner. But you have a couple spots where you're going to do it. That's helped me say like, well, I know I'm going to get to it. And really, as you're reading something, ask yourself, is my perspective or involvement like critical to getting this done? So I archive a lot more emails when I'm on a conference trip, and it's just things that there's 3 people on the thread, the other 2 are free, they can work that out. So really make sure if you're gonna, my inclination would normally be to, well, yeah, it sounds great. What if you did, and it depends on really, is it really, really critical for you? Otherwise you're gonna just end up spending 3 hours at night before you're trying to go to bed, and you don't really need to. So be sure to disconnect during the day. If something does require a response, like you look at it and you think, okay, I can't just leave this till next week. And it's sometimes they send something only to you, and even if they've gotten your bounce back, you're kind of unsure about it. The forward button is your friend. Like there should typically be somebody back in the office or your boss or someone else that you can forward it to and say, can you make sure this isn't on fire, and I can help with it when I come back next week. So rely on people. But luckily, if you've set that auto reply up, you shouldn't be concerned if you have to let something sit till the next day, because by then they should be aware. And if it really, really is urgent, they're looking for alternatives. Oftentimes I would put a colleague's email in that auto reply, right? So like, this is really urgent. Here's someone you can talk to. And then if you have work colleagues that people that you work really closely with, it's okay to kind of give them, this is sort of a working ahead thing, but let them know, like, well, I'm going to be at the conference next week. Don't worry about it. Please, if you need to, text me, right? Like, here's my cell number. This is be something that is like urgent, versus otherwise I am planning to look, in the evening. So I'm going to scan through things and just be able to kind of catch up. So yeah, letting them know what your plan is will maybe, I think for me, just helps me feel better about being able to unplug, even if they may forget and still be emailing me all day. Anything you wanted to add, or others? Okay. Okay. All right. Cool. Well, like again, just to reiterate, like it should feel like the conference is what you're there for, and whatever you need to do on a personal level or with your own manager to make that work. That's certainly the goal to strive toward. Okay, so the final section would be about follow-ups, and this is something that when I first started going to conferences, you don't, at least ahead of time, you don't think about like, well, there's stuff that happens after the conference, and so I think it's important, and maybe even if you consider this part of the planning ahead, it's all kind of circular, but understanding that when you come back, odds are good you're going to want to be able to block off a little time to have conversations or finalize your notes or share them with other people at your organization, or just realizing that first Monday back to work, if you can carve out a little time for debriefing, do that, because there are going to be things you want to do, and if you've got a full huge day of work, they're going to slip to the back burner, or you're going to feel overwhelmed. So using those notes that you took, hopefully, throughout or on the back of the business cards, it helps to follow up by email. I mean, some people, they don't love email. They may not write back to you. Others, you don't really necessarily even need to catch up with them right away. This may be, you don't necessarily want to email them the Friday night the conference is over and be like, hey, but sometime over the next couple of weeks, what I've done is just sort of distill down a list of here are the people I met that, I'd like to maintain a network in my network. And just over the course of the next few weeks, I'll do a couple each day and just say, it was so nice to run into you, last week at the conference. And if you ever need blah, 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 or if I wonder if I could reach out to you in a couple months to ask about this, or even if it is literally just that you had fun because you guys got to go someplace cool, you can say that. Another way you can do that, of course, is LinkedIn. So you can invite them to connect with you, add that personalized note, always add the personalized note. I will basically accept anybody. If you take the time to write me like a note that says something, you're in. If it's just, I would like to connect with you on LinkedIn. So yeah, just write that in the note and say, oh, it was so nice to have dinner the other night. I just had no idea what you guys did. That was really cool. Thanks. Okay, so yeah, so in your notes, you've got those little details. You add the Wolfpack line or whatever you do, it helps. And at that point that's just sort of a reaffirmation, right? If I get an email from someone afterward, I feel like, okay, it tells me that I was memorable enough, right? Like, because people will talk all conference, but it's good to know. And then, again, I usually do this in 2 passes. Well, I'll look straight through and I'll decide, I want to reach out to these people. I want to connect with them on LinkedIn. And then I go back and I do a second run through that is for my colleagues or friends even. Just, okay, is there anybody on this list that I need to connect with someone else at the organization? Like, I might not really need to follow up with them, but it'd be good to connect them now. And again, if you do that within a few weeks, it's not something that's so, it might be 6 to 8 months later before your colleague might really, really need something from this person you met. But if you've made that connection a little stronger, I find those secondary introductions or the times you reach back out are a little easier. And then that's a case where that often people reciprocate there, or at least I've found, where I've been like, I just want to make sure that you meet so-and-so, and they'll do the same. They'll think of us later, or me or the organization a month down the line and say, I met so-and-so. Yeah. All right. So yeah, I think that's all I've got in my notes for follow-ups. I mean, that you may have work-related things to catch up on. That's sort of, hopefully you've been able to push some of that away by working ahead or just helping people understand your schedule. But the main things, honestly, tend to be networks. You can also generally take those notes if you've learned something in a particular session, distill that down or make some kind of little, whether it's an email or a document or something in a Slack channel, whatever it is that you guys use, but a few bullet points that you want to share more broadly with your organization. people tend to like that, and it's a great way to implicitly remind people the value of having you attend things as well. So there's a lot in it for everybody. You manage to kind of grab the important pieces and remind yourself of them. You're sharing them with people. Anything else you want to add here? All right. So yeah, we're thinking we can basically, I know we're almost near the end anyway, but if you guys have examples of things that have gone really well or really poorly for you at conferences, this is helpful. I know a lot of us are helping with organizing conferences ourselves or are going to be attending more of them. So I find these stories interesting. Is there anything someone would like to?
One thing I have is I always like to write things down with a pen and pad, because I feel like it's easier for me to type notes with a computer, but I feel like it also kind of looks like I'm working, and I don't know, I just don't want to be disrespectful. And the last couple conferences I've gone to, it doesn't seem like they actually have. I feel like they used to include like a little notebook in your materials, and they don't do that anymore. So I'm like making a note, bringing paper.
Okay. Yeah, let's toss that in. Bring some paper with you. I think what it can do is force you to write down the most important things. That's maybe what I've found. Like, I can type really fast. My writing's pretty bad. And so if I'm jotting down notes, I'm limiting it to things that I feel like are really important versus just being a stenographer.
I like to follow people on Twitter from sessions that I thought were interesting, or maybe I feel like they're some sort of thought leader or something, maybe relevant to me down the road or something. Yeah. And that way, like, I try to keep my Twitter pretty like scholarly publishing focused rather than following. I do follow a couple bands I like or something, but then you can kind of see like through the years what that person's up to, what their organization's doing, and I think it can also be kind of a cool thing. And this would have to be like something that blew me out of the water, but to tweet that person after their presentation and say, "Thought it was awesome." I think that makes people feel nice too.
Yeah, I think I do a little bit softer just by mentioning, right? Heard from XYZ, about this, and somehow that feels different to me, although it's not. They get to mention either way. So. Yeah, no problem.
I was just going to say, I think part of sometimes what I do in like the pre-work and the networking part is if there's someone that I really want to meet, or like I want to get on their committee or get involved with them, and I'm sort of like intimidated by who they are, like I do a little pre-stalking, like look on their company site, LinkedIn, like talk to other people who might know them, like see what committees they're currently on, what they've done before. So when I go and like strike up a random conversation, like I have a hook, like, oh, I saw you chair that committee. I'm so interested. But like, that's like a good in with those people. Yeah. And like, the people who like lead, a major publishing organization, like what do you feel intimidated by those people who've been in the industry for like 30 years, but they're always really nice. So like, definitely always feel that you can approach those people, but go in having done a little homework.
I think that's great advice. I think it also just makes you feel more confident, right? I mean, like, I think you said that, but that's what I find the best. Yeah.
So one conference highlight of mine was at CSC, where I actually presented about being an editor. Michelle reminded me about someone tweeting something about something that happened in a panel, and someone tweeted something about something I said. It wasn't very profound, but it was that Oxford commas don't matter in editing, and there were audible gasps in this audience full of lifelong editors. So that was a high point. I would say, as far as one of the things I picked up kind of a long time ago, and this was at the ISMTE conference, is if there are people more senior and or experienced at this type of stuff than you are, coming from your organization in particular, it is very helpful to sort of watch and see how they interact with people. So some of y'all probably know Keith Collier, who is, I think it was a very, very good model. And I don't mean literally like just asking like, Keith, how do you do that? Because he's a nice guy or whatever. But like just kind of literally watching him from a distance interact with other people, and how he, like the sort of manner and way he interacted with people was a very good model. So if there are people, and it wouldn't have to be someone you work with, but you can sort of watch and learn from a distance if it's sort of a first time conference goer, to sort of get a sense of the vibe of the whole conference, but also, you know, find someone you can model some of your own behavior on, in terms of how you approach people, what kind of salesiness gets associated or lack thereof, and, you know, depending on what you're trying to do there.
Yeah, I think I've seen, maybe while you're preparing, I've definitely seen, I did the same exact thing at SSP in 2012 with Keith. And I think what it helps is, like, you can see this incredible, it's that sort of homework where you ask somebody about something, and then the next thing you know, it's like, well, you know, we've been thinking about this, like, service, whatever. And then all of a sudden, you know, he's got information from someone, like input from them, without just walking up and saying, well, we're considering doing X, you know, on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you feel about that, right? So, yeah, but that homework, I think, is the connection there. So.
Sorry, I promise it'll be the last time. You just got my juices flowing. So, like,
Hey,
I thought it was really interesting. So it's important to think about when you're talking to people you've never met before, like what you should not talk about or bring up. And, like, for example, I was really surprised at this, not surprised, but, like, so at this year's CSE meeting, one of the keynote speakers was very political, stance. So obviously that opened up conversations that were very political outside of that. And so, like, you have to be really careful about how you navigate that. And, like, generally, you know, don't talk about religion or politics, but, like, just being very aware of your surroundings, and that just because it seems like sometimes we're in this, like, monoculture in scholarly publishing, it's not true. So we need to be respectful and stay away from sort of controversial topics.
Yeah, first date rules for conversations, for sure.
Perfect. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Ben. And
thank
thank
you
you,
guys
Lindsay.
so
Lindsay
much.
had to run, but that was excellent.